Hello, and welcome to the IRB and Regulatory Documentation webinar. My name is Maisha, and I will be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. Please note this conference is being recorded. I will now turn the meeting over to Tracy Williams. You may begin.
Well, thank you everyone for dialing in and logging into our web conference today. We will discuss IRB and regulatory documentation, and Emily Dorer and Shauna Rothwell are our presenters. They have put together a great presentation on some critical aspects of the topic. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. In the meantime, if something comes up and you'd like to ask a question, I'll ask all to use the Q&A feature on the dashboard, which is up in the file menu up at the top of your screen. And you could submit your questions there, and we'll pose it periodically to the presenters. Please do not be shy. We welcome all questions and comments. In the meantime, let's get started. I'm going to invite Emily Dorer to tell us something about herself, how long she's been with the CTN, and something about her role, and then we'll also invite Dr. Rothwell to do the same. So I turn it over to Emily Dorer.
Hi, everyone. As she said, I'm Emily Dorer. I'm with the Ohio Valley Node of the CTN. I have been with the Ohio Valley Node since 2002, so almost 11 years. And my role has changed throughout the time, but the majority of the time I've been the regulatory director.
Hello everyone, my name is Shauna Rothwell. I am a CCC Clinical Protocol Specialist. I have been working with the CCC, or MS, a little shy of 4 years. I currently work as a protocol specialist for the 47 and 49 study. So let's get started. So the objectives for today's webinar are to first identify critical aspects of Institutional Review Board oversight and compliance, to determine appropriate regulatory documentation practices, and to examine roles and responsibilities involved in reporting progress to regulatory bodies. So first, we're going to go over some good clinical practice, pretty much like an overview or history of the fundamentals. So the regulations and guidelines that govern the ethical conduct of clinical research has been shaped by the following major milestones. You have the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report. I'll talk about these in more detail in a few other slides. You also have the International Conference on Harmonization and the International Standards Organization. Basically, what these two organizations do is they seek to have a set guidelines for clinical research as far as monitoring, reporting, auditing, and recording all clinical research data for US, Japan, and Europe. And then we also have the Code of Federal Regulations, which are pretty much the rules that we all must follow in clinical research. So first, you have the Nuremberg Code, which was actually brought upon by the Nazi war crimes. From the Nuremberg Code, you have the idea of voluntary participation, which means that a participant has to voluntarily be a part of a study. You have the informed consent process, was first mentioned, and you have the minimization of risk. And this all stems from during the Nazi war trials. They did effects on various poisons on people, ammunition, biological and chemical agents, testing, altitude, extreme temperatures, and these things were not done voluntarily. And of course, the risk was greater than the benefit for the participants. Also, you have the Declaration of Helsinki. The Declaration of Helsinki was actually named because it was adopted by the 18th World Medical Assembly, or the WMA, in Helsinki, Finland, and it's the foundation of human experiments. basically meaning that, one, the well-being of the participant takes precedence. You have respect for persons. You respect them as autonomous people that can make their own decisions. You protect the subject's health and rights at all times, and special protections for vulnerable populations such as children and prisoners. And then you have the Belmont Report. So the Belmont Report was created by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of biomedical and behavioral research. The report pretty much summarizes the ethical principles and guidelines for research involving human subjects. And the core principles of the Belmont Report are listed here. Respect for persons. We show this respect for persons when we give them informed consent. We give them a document in which we detail the specifics of the study. We give them contact information of the PI. We tell them all the benefits. We tell them risk if there are any. We offer them alternative methods to treatment. Also, we protect vulnerable populations. There are certain consents that are for children and women, such as for children and prisoners, and also the beneficent. We're not trying to do anything or cause any harm to a participant. And justice, of course, the study must be fair. So this all gears up to the Institutional Review Board. What is this committee? And I love this slide because it shows, first of all, what the IRB wants to do is it wants to protect the participant. So you have this doctor who says, all I wanted to do was give this treadmill, but the IRB put all these pads and helmets and things like that. And that's essentially what the IRB does. Its first function is to protect participants. So how does it do this? Well, it looks at the risk-benefit analysis. The benefit of the study must far outweigh the risk. Also, it must ensure that the selection of the participants is equitable, and it also must ensure the Belmont principles as far as respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And of course, the IRB makes sure there are additional safeguards for vulnerable populations. So a lot of what controls the IRB, or the rules that control the IRB, are in the CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, Part 56. And if you ever want to read it, it basically goes into the organization and personnel of an IRB. It goes into its functions and operations, how the IRB must handle records and reports, and administrative actions for noncompliance for the IRB. So it tells the IRB what will happen if they're found to be noncompliant with the Code of Federal Regulations. So the IRB must have at least 5 members. The members cannot be all the same gender, and they have varying professions. There's one person who has to be a science in nature, and at least one person who is not affiliated with the institution, or not even an immediate family member that is affiliated with the institution. And at times, members of an IRB can be clergy, lawyers, ethicists. Essentially, what the IRB is made up of is it is expected to have the qualifications and experience to evaluate all aspects of the proposed research. So when is IRB review required? So in the case of investigational drug or device, you have to have an IRB review any intervention or interaction with human subjects. And of course, anytime you collect any identifiable information and do data analysis of identifiable and private information on individuals. But there are some times in which IRB review is not required. And one of them is taste test. So the Pepsi Coke Challenge is not mandated by any IRB. It's essentially a consumer acceptance study. There's also more serious times in which the IRB review is not required. And this is when the investigator, and he has to get the approval with an independent physician. And this, what is meant by an independent physician is if this physician is not affiliated with the study at all. And they agree before using the test article that the following applies to the situation. First of all, it has to be life-threatening. The participant's life is in danger. The informed consent cannot be obtained due to the inability to communicate with the participant, such as if they were in a coma or things like that. And if time is of the essence, it's not enough time to obtain consent from the person's legal representative, spouse, mother, a person like that. And also there's no other alternative options available that have equal or greater likelihood of saving the life of the participant. I'm going to add to that and say no approved alternative options available. So if the investigator deems it necessary for immediate treatment with the test article to preserve the life of the participant and there's not enough time, there's still some follow-up that has to go with the IRB. There has to be documentation submitted to the IRB of the investigator's certification and a written explanation by the independent physician. These must be received or submitted to the IRB within 5 working days after the use of the test article. And of course, any subsequent use of the test article after this point is subject to IRB review. Of course, you might want to check with your IRB regarding the situation. Your IRB may impose more stringent requirements and may not even allow exceptions. So it's something that is case by case and based on different, based on the IRB of record. So usually with IRB reviews, there's 3 types: your initial review, any amendments, and a continuing review. The documents that are usually submitted or the IRB wants to see are the protocol, the informed consent forms, whether there be a main consent form or a consent form for an ancillary study, even screening and verbal consents. IRBs want to see those. Any recruitment materials and advertisements to make sure there's no coercion, participant handouts or counseling materials, basically anything you're giving this participant. And of course, the IRB wants to know when the study is closed at your site. So when an IRB is reviewing a protocol or amendment or a review, they basically want to see if the study is being conducted in compliance with the protocol. Are you following the directions per se? Is the investigator complying with IRB requirements? For example, is the IRB reporting adverse events in a timely manner? Status reports to the IRB, are you up to date with those? And also they're interested in randomization procedures and masking because they want to see that your selection of your participants is equitable. So regulatory documentation practices, and these are more so related to the sponsor. I'm going to cover the sponsor related responsibilities, and Emily will go into detail with the node and the local responsibilities. So a sponsor is anyone who takes responsibility for and initiates a clinical investigation. And I love that, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, because that essentially is what your sponsor has. They have a huge responsibility. They have to ensure the proper monitoring of the investigation. They have to ensure that the FDA and all other regulatory bodies and participating investigators are promptly informed of any significant adverse events. They have to select qualified monitors to monitor their study, and they have to maintain and retain adequate records and reports. Now, a lot of times your sponsor will contract these duties out, and that's where you have EMIS, the Clinical Coordinating Center. We're the CRO, the Clinical Research Organization for the NIDA CTN, and we pretty much help and take over with these 4 responsibilities. We have monitoring visits. We do report to the FDA for the sponsor, and we do have our monitors come out to your sites. And we always have to maintain regulatory documents in our regulatory tracking system, which I'll talk about towards the end of the presentation. And we have to let the sponsor know, as far as any records that you may keep on site, where they're going to be kept. So essentially, the sponsor is responsible for all operational aspects of the clinical trial. So the regulatory documents for NIDA studies are as follows. You have your protocol, your informed consent template. And so for the informed consent template, we do ask that sites submit the informed consent template before they submit it to their IRB to the CCC, because we like to make sure that all the essential elements and additional elements are in your consent. And a lot of times, because you're copying and pasting or cutting and pasting into your IRB templates, you may accidentally omit an important section from the informed consent. It's not done intentionally. It's usually done as a mistake. And so we catch these things. So we do ask that sites submit their informed consent template to us before they submit it to the IRB. The certificate of confidentiality, this is done by the lead PI, usually for most CTN studies. The package insert and investigator brochure, those are usually provided by the CCC, and your endorsement forms. And when we say fully executed, we mean the lead node PI signs your endorsement form, the CCC PI, the DSC PI, and a NIDA CCTN representative. The NIDA CCTN representative is usually the CPC of the study. And the date of endorsement is the last date that form was signed. So if you ever look at your endorsement form in your regulatory binder, you'll see that, maybe a couple of PIs signed the day before, and a PI may have signed a couple of days after, especially if it was on a weekend. The latest date is the date of endorsement. As far as documentation of laboratories, we like to see CAPs and CLIAs and lab reference ranges for local labs, and we provide them for the central labs, especially if you're dealing with quintiles. We usually get the regulatory documentation for you and provide it for you and for you to update your regulatory binder. For these, for local CAPs and CLIAs and lab reference ranges, of course they must be up to date. Check the expiration. Usually, if it is expiring, you'll have a protocol specialist contact you and ask you to upload a up-to-date certificate. So as far as site documents, we like to see the DEA registration. It could be to an institution or an individual. It must be up to date. FWA, we don't ask you to upload your FWA number because we can get this information from the OHRP website. So you don't have to upload that. Also, IRB approvals, consents, and protocols, and your IRB roster. If it is available, if it can be obtained, please upload your IRB roster. OHRP approval for special populations, such as prisoners, and protocol signature page. The protocol signature page must be signed by PIs and sub-Is, and it is uploaded into the regulatory tracking system as if it's an investigator agreement, because essentially it is an investigator agreement. It's an agreement that the PIs and the sub-Is will follow the protocol and make sure that the protocol is followed at their site. And it's actually an agreement between, if you look at the protocol signature page, a NIDA representative signs the top and the investigators sign the bottom. So basically at your site, you're agreeing with NIDA that you are making sure that the design of the protocol is being conducted as per protocol. And also, you have your site signature and delegation logs. These are investigator agreements. Essentially, the investigator agreeing with their site, meaning that, for example, Jane Doe, I'm as an investigator, I'm signing that she is the study coordinator, and she's trained and she's doing all the duties associated with the study coordinator. As far as site staff documents, curriculum vitae for investigators, as well as financial disclosure certification for IND studies, and there's a financial disclosure tracking form for non-IND studies. As far as the one for non-IND studies, the tracking form, we ask that you upload that at each continuing review to keep it current. Also, the form FDA 1572, that's for IND studies, and there also is the investigator agreement, or the IA, that is used for non-IND studies. We like to see evidence of GCP and HSP training for all staff that are interacting with participants, whether you're doing consenting, you're performing an assessment, you're the interventionist giving an intervention, you're the nurse that's taking a blood draw. You have to have HSP and GCP training. These trainings are from the date of taking them. They expire 3 years later. for both. For our drug studies, we need to see a DEA registration for practitioners, and for those studies in which there is an MD or even a LCSW, we need to see a license that is state issued, that is current. And for all studies now in the CTN, we require to see a training documentation form. So what this training documentation form lists, it lists all the trainings for the study, and for a particular role, you may or may not be required to do a training, but you have to check off and also check the date. And usually the lead node of the study will sign off to say that you have been trained. This training documentation form is also uploaded into the regulatory tracking system. And it must be received for all individuals on the study at the site. So all sites must obtain approval from their appropriate IRBs prior to study start. So the IRB must review and approve the following: the protocol, the informed consent, recruitment materials, and other necessary documents. In other words, when you're ready to start research, the CCC will not even schedule an initiation visit with you unless you have IRB approval. In some cases, there has been guidances or exceptions, but ideally, the ideal situation is that you would have IRB approval as well as have an IRB approval. Excuse me. And for the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Roshana. And as a lead investigator, they have responsibilities as well, which is, they're responsible. They have to follow and comply with all applicable protections for human subjects and clinical research regulations at local, state, and federal levels. They obtain IRB approval for their protocol and maintain it throughout the conduct of the trial. And they also work with the sites to ensure that the sites have approval from their respective IRBs. They also, actually all study sites need to maintain regulatory documents. As Roshana stated, that includes uploading documents to the regulatory tracking system, which she will talk about in a little bit, as well as maintaining a regulatory binder at the site level. Each CTP needs to be aware of their own regulatory responsibilities, and each research site has to have a federal-wide assurance number from OHRP before they can start enrollment in a study. And for those not familiar, the FWA process is pretty simple. It's an online application process, but something that sites need to look into if they've not done research and how their institution would like that handled. Lead node, you need to find out if there's any special requirements for leading a multi-site trial with your institution or your IRB. I'll go into a little bit more about that in a little bit. Local site, your responsibility, you need to figure out how are you going to maintain the regulatory binder? Is it going to be electronic? Is it going to be paper? Is it going to be housed at the site with a shadow copy at the node? Are you going to have identical copies at the node and site? Who will be responsible for updates to it? Will it be the node staff? Will it be the site staff? And this is both updating the physical regulatory binder as well as the RTS system, which is the next point. The CCC has established a table of contents for the regulatory binder, and that is sent out at the beginning of each study, and that lists what documents are expected in the regulatory binder. Those that have been around the CTN for a while, this is evolved over time and is kind of more succinct than it used to be, but the listing gives you a general idea of what needs to be maintained in the binder. Roles and responsibilities. The lead node is responsible for overseeing the study at all participating sites. They communicate with the Clinical Coordinating Center as well as the individual sites. The lead node is also responsible for applying for the Certificate of Confidentiality from NIDA or the FDA, depending on the context of the study, whether or not it involves a medication. And they are also responsible for registering the trial with the clinicaltrials.gov website and maintaining that registration throughout the course of the study. The local node is responsible for overseeing the study at one or more participating sites. They communicate directly with the lead node as well as the site IRB. The participating site communicates with the local node, lead node, site administration, and they also conduct the trial. At the beginning of a study, it's always good to have a good idea of what your IRB expects. Some things to find out are who can serve as a principal investigator. Some IRBs require that the principal investigator of the study be a faculty or staff member at the institution. Some just require that a faculty or staff member be listed as an investigator. Are there educational requirements that your IRB requires for those serving as a principal investigator? What is your IRB's attitude towards amendments? Do they mind if you submit a lot of little amendments, or do they want them combined into fewer, larger amendments? Time frame for review is another thing to think about and to find out. Are there any additional requirements if you're the lead of a multi-site trial? Here at the University of Cincinnati, our IRB, if we are leading a multi-site trial, has some additional requirements for documentation that we have to maintain, whereas other institutions don't necessarily have those. And I'll go into a little bit more in that later. Submission timelines. Does your IRB meet frequently? Do they meet monthly? Are there submission deadlines in order to get onto the agenda? Those are things to keep in mind and talk with your IRB about before a study begins. So submitting regulatory documents accurately. Lead node, typically you're going to submit the initial protocol first to your IRB and get their approval before you send it out to the sites. That's not always the case for a modification or an amendment. Best practice we found is that you have all your study documents available and ready when you present the initial protocol to the sites for submission. Recently we found that a lot of IRBs are asking for CRF manuals, the full or sections of the operations manual. They always want to see the protocol. It's good as a lead node to send out an informed consent template, that can either be one with fill in the blanks, or if you have your node has a site participating, you could send out that site's template or that site's approved consent form for use by the other sites in helping them form the sections of their consent. Site monitoring and quality assurance plan is another thing to have prepared and ready to go out, as well as copies of advertisements, handouts, any documents that may need to be approved by or reviewed or approved by an IRB. For the lead team also, what are your reporting requirements? As I mentioned, here at the University of Cincinnati, we have to keep a couple things additional if we are leading a multi-site trial. We have to keep copies of all of the site approvals as well as their submission documents. We have to notify our IRB of safety reports from the other sites. And at the time of continuing review, in addition to our local sites, demographics, and enrollment information, we have to include that of the participating sites. So if you're the lead node of a study, it's a good idea to talk with your IRB or look through their policies to find out if there are any additional requirements for serving as the lead of a multi-site trial. The local node, you need to know what your IRB requires and convey that to the lead team as early as possible in the pre-implementation process. Will your IRB accept a draft version, or must they approve a final version? What kind of submission timelines do you have? Does your IRB permit more than one review activity ongoing at the same time? In the past, here at University of Cincinnati, we could submit a modification and a continuing review at the same time. We recently switched over to an electronic system, and that's no longer applicable. We can only have one type of review ongoing at a given time. So that changes how you structure your submissions to the IRB. Internal and external reporting requirements. Internal reporting, it's the NIDA CTN, the PRB, DSMB, the CCC, and the DSC. External would be to the IRBs, to the DEA, or to the FDA as applicable. And I'm going to turn the slides over, or the presentation back over to Shauna.
Thank you, Emily. And also, I wanted to remind the participants, the attendees, I got participants on the brain, attendees that you can take advantage of the Q&A feature in which, if you want to type out a question, if you have a burning question that you would like to ask, please type it out. Tracy will let us know, and she'll ask your question at an appropriate time. And, of course, this is probably the best time to ask questions because we're going to talk about the regulatory tracking system.
Yeah, Shauna, I did have one question.
Oh, great.
Great. So on slide 22, you talked about some of the documents that site staff would need to submit in RTS. And there was a question or a clarification request for the financial disclosure certificate and the tracking form. We use a certificate for the IND studies. Is that submitted in RTS, and then how does that compare to non-IND studies where they need the tracking form?
Okay, so the certification form is submitted to is uploaded to RTS, and that is for IND studies. The tracking form is not. What we would like you to do with your tracking form is to put that tracking form in your regulatory binder. Also, the difference between the two is that the tracking form is actually updated at continuing review. We tell sites annually, but a good kind of trigger for that is every time you're submitting, and this is for non-IND studies, let me clarify, non-IND studies, tracking form, submitted at continuing review. That way, when you know you're submitting that in, you just automatically have your PI sign that, your PI and sub-I sign that, and put it in your binder. It does not need to go into RTS. Now, the certification for IND studies does need to go into RTS, and I believe it's only done one time.
Great. That sounds great. One more question or clarification. On the endorsement forms, how important is it that the CPC sign that last?
It's very important. So the CPC, basically, that's like NIDA's go ahead, go. That's actually the last signature on the endorsement process. Being the protocol specialist is actually a fun time during endorsement time, let me tell you, because you have to catch Bob Lindblad, Paul Van Veldhuizen, and, of course, the local node PI. You have to make sure you can get him to sign it, him or her to sign it as well. So I say that because there can be no missing signatures. Pretty much the CPC signature is like NIDA's green light to go.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to start talking about the regulatory tracking system. So the RTS, or the regulatory tracking system, is the way in which site staff submit documents to the CCC. Basically, when you are in the process of uploading documents for a study, we ask that there be two contacts, one at the node and one at the site. And both of these individuals would be responsible for uploading the documents. So what we do is we usually ask these two people to let us know who you are. We send you the URL and a password and a username. You use that password and your username, and you're directed to a screen, and actually there's a picture of the screen on the next slide, I believe. And from that point, you can start uploading documents. So the steps in how to do that would be to first scan and name the document according to the convention guide. The naming convention guide is in a couple of slides, and we'll talk about that. Also, you want to use the URL and enter the site and study-specific username and password that I just mentioned. You want to select the document type. Now, this is very important because for a continuing review and an initial approval, they have different classifications in the RTS system. You'll see something for both. So what I've seen as far as mistakes that can happen is that you have an amendment and somebody will put a initial approval or a continuing review, and it's just an amendment. So you have to really, really pay attention to what you are uploading this document to, because if you upload it to something wrong and we review it, we reject it. And I'll talk about that's one of the ways in which a document will get rejected. Another way is that if it's not named correctly. The CCC has a naming convention guide that we send out to sites, as well as it's in most, if not all at this point, studies manual of operations. And follow this naming convention guide. And the reason why we ask sites to follow it is because when you upload documents over the course of a study and you follow the naming convention guide, in RTS your documents fall perfectly. For example, they fall by date. So if you name the document appropriately by date, it'll fall. So we know that the most current, we know the current versus the ones that are more obsolete. So that's why we ask for you for the naming convention document, the naming convention. We're not trying to tease you or make something harder, but it does make the output for us easier to follow, because there's a ton of documents during the course of a study. And I don't have to tell you guys that actually do regulatory documents, because you have like binders and binders and binders and binders of information. So you can imagine what the output is like on the backside. Also, you want to complete the fields as prompted and click update. So you want to follow the date format of month, month, day, day, and year, 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 year. So a lot of times what we notice is that sites don't put an expiration date, or they don't put a date of the document. It's not necessarily the date that you're uploading, it's the date of the document. So for example, if you're uploading a document and the decision of the IRB was a week ago and the IRB's date is a week ago, you put that date on the document in the date field. It doesn't say document date, but that's the date that we're going for. Also, so once you've done that and you click upload, there's a review process. The protocol specialists, we usually try to check them every week. We'll see this document in the queue, and we review it. So we review it to make sure that, one, the document actually is what it is, because you can upload a blank PDF page if you want. We have to review it and make sure that it actually is that document. Two, we want to make sure the naming convention is correct, so it lays out perfectly. And three, we want to make sure if you are uploading it for the right person. Another problem or another mistake that we're noticing is, I'm Shauna Rothwell, and I'll use Bob Lindblad because he's my PI. He's the CCC PI. I'm uploading, say, Bob's medical license. But instead of clicking Robert Lindblad, I click Shauna Rothwell because I'm Shauna Rothwell uploading for Bob Lindblad. What ends up happening is that when I get the document and I receive it, it's not linked to the appropriate person. And what often happens when it's not linked to the appropriate person, it's lost in RTS. It's not necessarily lost, it's just under the wrong person. So that just prevents us from kind of re-asking you for the document all over again and you saying, but I uploaded it. You did upload it. It's just it may have been uploaded under the wrong name. So whenever you're uploading documents, make sure that you as a person that is uploading for, say, a PI or a sub-I, you're uploading under their name, not your name. Also, once the document has been uploaded and we review it and approve it, there's usually a response back where we say, hey, you know, I received this document. We list the documents if there's a lot of them, and usually at the time of continuing review, you're uploading a continuing review approval, you're uploading consent templates, you're uploading you know, any amendment in staff. So if there is a long list, we list those out and we let you know that they've been reviewed and approved, and in any case, if we've rejected documents, we let you know why we reject them and that you need to re-upload them. So there you go. You have the document rejected with an explanation and further instruction, or you have the documents approved and therefore the document is up in the RTS stratosphere, so to speak. So I'm going to pause here because I always feel like RTS is always a meaty topic for questions. So please, if you're like, wait a minute, this is your opportunity, use that Q&A feature and let me know if you have any questions on anything I just said or just RTS in general. So once again, the naming convention guide. We're going to take a CV and we're going to use Dr. Ling. And so for the naming convention, you'll see that it'll have the last name, CV, date signed. So we want to see in the case for CVs, it's usually the investigator's last name, the type of document it is the CV, and the date that he signed it. Why do I need to know the date that he signed it? Well, CVs have a 2-year expiration date. So as a protocol specialist or something, if we see that date, then we know that, okay, his CV will expire in 4/12/13. You also put the expiration date when you upload it, but at least, that expiration date kind of being the hand on the handle is a visual to let me know when that expires. Also, as another cause for rejection is to please PDF your document before uploading. Word files such as doc and docx are not acceptable. We prefer PDF files, and these PDFs cannot be larger than 6 megabytes. And so for sites using electronic binders, we also ask that you follow the CCC's naming convention for standardization across the board. So we're going to look at how to upload a document. And so as you see here at the bottom, there's a select type of document to upload. So you want to select it. So for example, in this case, it's an IRB response. So as you can see, you have IRB response, IRB composition, IRB approved consent. So what if you have a response about the consent? Say, for example, if you have an approval for a consent, then that would go under the IRB responses, but the IRB approved consent template itself goes in the consent, under the consent. You would click the consent tab for that. So, I went back. So this is the naming convention guide. And so it pretty much goes for each document as far as a CV, a DE registration, and these are the next few slides. I'm not going to read them, line by line. But for each type of document that we ask you to upload, we provide you with a naming convention and a naming example. In the works right now, we're going to add a 4th column in which we tell you where to upload the document. For example, which category to click when you're uploading for each document. This document is right now in internal review, and when it's completed, hopefully soon, I will be uploading this to the investigator toolbox. If you don't know where the investigator toolbox is, it's on the TPR page, the DSC TPR page, under CTN documents. If you click on that and you scroll down, I believe it's the last, it's like 1, 2, 3 documents with the policies and procedures, and it's in that category, right at the 3rd one, the investigator toolbox. You click there and it has a lot of the documents in the CTN that we commonly use. It's a really good resource. Also within this, I will be adding the naming convention guidelines, the updated one once it's updated. And that's more naming convention stuff. So for all of the formats as far as JPEG and doc, etc., they will be rejected. Now there's some kind of confusion as far as the 1572 and the IA. We ask that the original signed wet copy of the 1572 and the investigator agreement be sent to the CCC. Attention to the protocol specialist assigned to your study. The original copy should be converted to a PDF format and uploaded to RTS as well. So you have your IA original wet copy sent to us. The PDF is uploaded to the RTS database, and the copy is in your regulatory binder. Also, staff signature logs should be uploaded to RTS within 90 days from the date of original signature and then resubmitted per study need. So with the staff signature logs, we ask that site staff upload those as site changes occur. So for example, if you have a study coordinator that leaves, we would like to see an end date as well as a start date for each one. And the start date should be after the date of endorsement or the date of endorsement. Start date, end date for whenever they left, and then you upload it. And any additional staff, a start date, upload it. So every time there's a staff change, that staff delegation log should be uploaded to RTS. And for any of the GCP, HSP trainings, we accept GCP and HSP trainings that are approved by your institution, your IRB. So if you have an RCR, a city, or an institutional training for these, they're acceptable. We ask that you upload them as PDFs, include the date, the date of the GCP on there. So for example, if you have an HSP and it took your study coordinator or someone a few days to complete that training, because it is a pretty robust training, whatever is the latest date, for example, if they completed it, it took them May 27th, May 28th, and May 29th, that May 29th date is that date on the end of the GCP training. We take 3 years from that date before that for your GCP training or your HSP training is expired. So let's review. So we have, as far as the things that were talked about in this presentation, what are some critical aspects of the Institutional Review Board oversight and compliance? I think I touched on that as well as Emily. She took her node as an example, and thank you, Emily. Also, what are the required documents for IRB review? And what are some appropriate regulatory documentation practices? And Emily did an awesome job talking about how the Ohio Valley thing is like a regulatory machine. They crank out documents and things like that. So it's a good, I like their documentation practices. And so at this time, I'll open it up for Q&A. And also, Tracy will read any questions that may have come up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you wish to be removed from the queue, please press the pound sign or hash key. If you are using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up your handset first before pressing the numbers. Once again, if you have a question or a comment, that is star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. We are now awaiting any questions.
Over Shauna and Emily, we did not have any questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, anyone, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, rrothwell, rrothwell @ms.com if you happen to think of any later on.
Right. Thank you so much, Shauna. And you can also send it to the email ctntraining@ms.com, and we will definitely forward it on to Dr. Rothwell and Ms. Emily Dorer. So everyone, thank you so much for coming. I want to thank Emily and Roshana for such a wonderful job of summarizing the topic. We do have a survey going out to those. We'd like to hear from you as to your satisfaction with this topic and whether there are other continuing conversations here that we need to have. And on Wednesday, May 29th, our follow-up discussion will be site management and performance, and we have a couple of investigators in the CTN who will summarize some critical aspects for us to consider, all our members and our affiliates. So thank you, everyone. We're going to post this presentation on the CTN Dissemination Library in the coming weeks. It takes about 10 days to post there, and you will also have the ability to access the materials. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you all for participating. You may now disconnect.